All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel, From Outsider to Insider, Finding My Authentic Voice in an Unfamiliar Space. My name is Desmond Cole. I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Medicine, and I'm honored to moderate today's session. Whether you're stepping into a new role or navigating different cultural landscapes, finding your authentic voice can sometimes be challenging. Our panel today will share their experiences on how they broke into unfamiliar terrains, all while staying true to themselves. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. Our first panelist is Dr. Patty O'Brien Richardson. She is an associate professor at Rutgers University and a leading expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion with over 20 years of experience. An award-winning educator, she has significantly influenced DEI policy in both academic and corporate settings and has extensively researched racial politics and dress code and hair discrimination. Beyond the classroom, Dr. Patty's global health justice initiatives extend to Southern Africa, where she focuses on women's health and education. Our second panelist is Dr. Tiffany Wright. She serves as a professor and Educational Foundations Department Chair at Millersville University, bringing over 25 years of experience in education and leadership. She is the founder and former co-director of a joint EDD program in educational leadership and currently coordinates the Postmasters Supervisory Program in Curriculum and Instruction. Dr. Wright is also an advocate for workplace equality, conducting research on the climate for LGBT educators, and providing extensive professional development in LGBT issues in schools. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alexander Gamero Garrido, who is an assistant professor of computer science at the University of California, Davis. With a research focus at the crossroads of computer networking systems and public policy, he specializes in online privacy issues. His multidisciplinary approach incorporates methodologies from both computer networking and social sciences, and his work has won many awards at computer networking conferences. Welcome, panelists. So let's get started. So first, I wanted to start off by acknowledging the diverse paths you all have taken to arrive at your current roles. Can each of you talk a bit about your career journeys and broadly speaking, how authenticity has helped you succeed in spaces in which you initially felt a bit alienated? Dr. Patty, let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and a huge warm welcome to everyone here in the session and also to my co-panelists. It's great to be alongside with you. So I think for me, how I've been able to chart my career journey and at the same time being true to myself, and how authenticity has helped me succeed in spite of feeling alienated. I think really it goes back to really being who you are, just being honest with who you are. I mean, I have to know that when I walk into a room, the way I present myself matters. People see me, they see, if you could see me in person, I'm actually 6 feet tall, but you wouldn't know. But I'm 6 feet tall and I present as a Black woman. But as you continue to get to know me, you'll find that there are many layers to me. And I think this is true for everyone. I'm much more than just a tall Black woman. I'm also a mother. I'm also a daughter. As I was speaking with my esteemed co-panelist, Dr. Wright, I'm also an educator. I'm also a gardener. I'm also a yogi. So I think one thing that I've noticed is when it comes to being feeling alienated and really being authentic to yourself, it's being upfront about who you are. It's being confident in who you are, but it's also practicing cultural humility, asking questions of others that may have a different identity than you, and really asking questions in terms of topics and interests that really interest you of the other person. We're all very diverse, but I've learned that if you ask questions and you share about yourself vulnerably, you'll find that we actually have a lot more in common.
Thank you, Dr. Patty. And Tiffany?
Sure. Great lead off, and I want to echo Dr. Patty's comments around welcoming everyone here. I'm so glad you took time out of your day to be here with us. This is going to be such a great space, and I'm really thankful to be here with all of my esteemed colleagues and with all of you. So I think when I think about my authenticity, it goes back to I was student teaching in the 1990s. I got certified originally as an high school English teacher. And I remember my co-op saying to me, I don't mind, and it's okay to me that you're gay, but you can't let anybody else know about that. And she was really well-meaning. She was really trying to protect me and protect my future career as an educator. And it was at that moment that I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll become famous by being a teacher in Pennsylvania who gets fired for being gay. Because and it's not like I was going into classrooms and putting my business out there. I was there to teach English. But I had always said to myself, if a kid asks, they're asking for a good reason, most likely. And I'm going to be honest with them because I don't want to put someone in front of them who's not going to be authentic and truthful and kids were looking for role models. They are now still, and they were especially back in the 90s when I started teaching. And so I think that level of confidence to say, you know what, it's better for the students that I work with that I'm authentic, because then I'm a better teacher because I'm not scared and looking behind my back all the time. And I think it has helped me to be successful in all the different ways that I've been an educator over the past 25 years.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Alex?
Yeah, I have to join my co-panelists in thanking everyone for being here. I'm very excited to have received this invitation, and I think this will be a great use of your time. I have to echo Dr. Patty's words that I kind of don't have a choice, right? Like, I am in a discipline where the diversity numbers are just abysmal. And, in a computer science room, I would phrase this a little bit more positively, but I think here I can be honest. And I'm also 6 foot tall, and so there's nowhere for me to hide. You see this face, and it's like, computer science, what's happening? So I partly for that reason, but also partly because I just personally cannot get motivated to work on technical problems that don't have societal impact, right? Like, I have colleagues that will just like live or die for compilers. I will never be that person. Like, I'm glad they exist, and they're the reason we have computers as well as the other fields of computing. But like, embracing the fact that I am Latino, I am a migrant, I'm gay, and in using that as the source of my power in research, right? Like, looking in places where nobody has looked before, looking at the networks of the Global South, looking at discrimination by tech companies, particularly against LGBT people, against women, against people who don't speak English as a native language. These are attributes that didn't make my social life very easy, for the longest time. But they're also the reason I'm here, right? They're also the reason I got this job that I'm really proud of. And the reason that my research has had the impact that it's had, whereas more traditional research that, will make Facebook 2% faster, or will make a data center in Zurich, spend 0.5% less energy. Like, I don't care. And also, like, I wouldn't be able to do it. But the fact that path is not there for me, the computing path, where like basically you're just improving the bottom line of big corporations, that path is not available to me because I'm not a traditional computer scientist. That has had a tremendous boost in my career. And so I think I kind of I've had no choice, but I'm happy that I haven't had a choice, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you. It was very inspiring. So this next question is very personal for me. I mean, this entire talk is personal for me, but it's about navigating intersectionality. In full disclosure, I am both Black and also gay. I was raised in the deep South and had to navigate all the complexities that comes with. So considering some of us come from intersecting identities, be it race, gender, sexuality, etc., how do each of you navigate these complexities in your own professional settings? And Dr. Patty, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Desmond. Well, as I shared before, there's no hiding who I am. Who I present when I walk into a room, I have to recognize that that's what people see. But what you see isn't always what you get. And so I think that's why it's so important to be unapologetically who you are, because we live in a society where people have their own biases. People, meaning me also. We all have our biases about what we see on television. There's research that shows that we automatically connect and build a knowledge base about people based what we've heard, based on what we've read, based on what we've seen in the past. And a large part of that is social media. So it's really unfortunate that what people see on television and the media and social media, that's it's the composition of their knowledge around individuals. So I have to be aware of that. That when I walk into a room, people might see me as some sort of figment of their experience, something that they have seen, which is why it is so important that we are authentic in who we are in the workplace, in professional settings. Be yourself. You might be the first and only person that anyone has ever met that is not like them in their identity. And so what helps me is really, as I shared before, sharing about my background. So for example, I am not just a Black woman, that I identify as a Black woman. My pronouns are she, her, but my family, they're not American. They came from the Caribbean. And I'm also first gen. And so for me, that means a lot. The first to go to college, the first to experience formal education. I'm also the firstborn. So all of those firsts have really helped me and pushed me to be at a space where I can just go out and be myself. But for everyone that's here in the room, it's important that you do that, whether you're not first gen or whether you're the seventh born. But know that when you walk into a room, if you don't see anyone that looks like you or shares the identity that you have, you might be the exemplar. And that means that they may have a knowledge base of something that has come from a fictitious source. But as you are yourself, your unique self, and knowing that there's no one else in that room like you, there's no one that has the imprint that you have. And that's an incredible platform that you've been given to really make a difference. So I always say, be yourself. And it's actually a blessing to have intersectional identities, because you are being who you are. And for many people, that might be the first time they've ever seen that before. So you need to shine in those rooms. You need to walk in like you own the room, and you need to be yourself.
Thank you. Tiffany, how do you navigate the complexities of your intersectionality?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. While I am someone who could probably pass as a straight white woman, it's interesting that I've chosen not to over the years. And I think the most intersectionality that I have had to kind of grapple with was so before I was a professor, I was a high school principal. And so as there are fewer females in high school administration than there are in elementary school. And so, being surrounded by mostly white guys all the time who were straight, and so fighting their, they call it the glass ceiling. So having that experience, and then also having the experience of being gay, was just really interesting. And, just echoing what Dr. Patty says, just being your authentic self. I can recall many conversations in schools where I've worked over the years where folks were saying things like, they meet me and they're like, oh, so are you married? What's his name? And I would just be like, well, no, I'm not married. I have a partner and her name is. And then I would just walk away. And, because there's just automatic assumptions, because I am definitely not 6 foot, and I walk into a room and people make assumptions about me, of course, and they probably assume, not so much anymore, I don't think, but then they probably assumed that I was just, a white young female teacher who was about to get married and have kids and all of that. So I think that's been interesting and challenging. And when I was hired at Millersville, they already knew me. So that was not an issue for me. But the intersectionality that's been challenging at Millersville really has been working and having to get grace for having a kid who has autism and ADHD, and which means a lot of accommodations have to be made for him and therefore me. So that's another intersectionality that I don't think we talk about too much, but Dr. Patty did mention the parenting role as one of those pieces, one of those depths of who some of us are.
Right. Thank you so much. And Alex, would you like to add on, I guess, how you navigate the complexities of your own intersectionality?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. As somebody who, like Tiffany, is also surrounded by white guys at all times, I think the biggest issue for me has been that it's not really possible to find a single space, like a single room or a single building that will embrace like all of me at the same time, right? Like I can walk into the Latino Cultural Center and then, I can stop being a person of color for a moment. But if you know anything about Latinidad, you know that masculinity is aggressively policed, much more aggressively than it is in the mainstream US culture, I would say. And so it's kind of like the Solomon baby, right? Like I can't just like split myself into the Latino part and the gay part. I exist as a whole. And so what ended up, and this is not something that I knew at the time, but what ended up happening is that I joined the Graduate Women in Computing group at my doctoral institution. And that was one of the best decisions I've ever made, right? Like I sincerely don't know if I would still be here if not for that group. And I present very much like a cis man, but being in a space where like femininity is constantly under attack in STEM and especially in computer science, right? It's just like I've seen it with my colleagues that joined the same year as me. Like they've had their chairs like stolen. Like people have like it's just like a level of hostility that I do not understand and I have never experienced. And so I think going to a community that you perhaps don't naturally belong to, but that is also marginalized in your field, is a way to navigate that intersection because it forces you to kind of like take apart what's happening, right? And I went to the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing, which is a 30,000 count conference that's usually in Orlando. And 3% of the attendees identify as men. And there you really realize that the cause for the discrimination is not because of the lopsided dynamics of the system, right? It's a choice because I was not discriminated against, right? Like I felt included, I felt like I belonged, and in fact, there was kind of like a celebration that I was there, right? Like, what is this guy doing here? Like, I'm so glad you're here. And so that's how I kind of navigated that intersection.
Thank you, thank you. This next question is for Dr. Patty. So Dr. Patty, you've made significant strides in DEI policy. Could you speak to the role of effective communication and advocacy in advancing these causes?
Sure. I'm very proud to represent the Rutgers University, but also my school is the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. So coming from a school of policy, I believe it's really critical to understand that nothing changes unless there's a policy attached to it. And so you could march all day, all night. You could start a hunger fasting initiative. You could collect clothes, coats, shoes, funding. But unless there is a policy attached to your cause, things will continue and be the same. You can take any situation. I know for me, one thing that's dear to my heart is the constant seeing in the media of Black people, unarmed Black people being killed and murdered at the hands of law enforcement. And the fact is that in many of these cases, they're able to continue their work and have their pension. And the only reason that something like that continues is because there isn't a policy that says that if you murder someone for no reason, then your pension will be taken away. Or you can fill in the blanks on any scenario. So it's important that we understand that nothing changes unless we have a policy to it, attached to it. And what that means is, in our passion, when we are passionate about our work, it's important that we understand the journey that it takes to go from our passion to a policy. And a lot of that involves our communication and our partnerships, for one. I think everyone should be able to connect, especially if you're an early career professional, on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, with organizations in your field. There are national associations for just about every industry. I would encourage everyone to get involved. That's a great place to start, to get your feet wet when it comes to communication. Joining a work group that is interesting to you and being involved. And another area I would say in terms of communication and policy is listening. It is a very underutilized, overemphasized skill, but listening is huge. Policymakers need to hear what you have to say about your cause. So it's important that you are listening to the people that you represent. You might be able, because of your education, because of your privilege, and I'm speaking you, meaning everyone in the room, and everyone who can hear me, you might be able to get into certain doors that the people that you represent may not be able to. So it's important that you listen to those needs and that you hold space for the people that you represent. You have the ears of the policymakers, so you want to be able to share the anecdotes, share the data, communicate it in a well-rounded, equitable way so that changes can be made. And the last skill I would just say would be empathy, to really understand that just because you are standing beside someone that has experienced something, it doesn't mean that you can fully understand what they've gone through. But it's important that you can really help the person to express how they're feeling, really trying to understand their point of view and being able to communicate that, or helping that person communicate that. So I will just round it off by saying and reiterating that nothing changes unless there's a policy attached to it. So in your capacity as a early career professional or as a professional, look for ways to get involved, to form partnerships, and to move your thoughts, for your passion, from passion to policy.
Thank you, Dr. Patty, on that very brief but important lesson on effective communication and advocacy. Now I want to sort of tap into your wisdom, Tiffany. So how does creating an inclusive educational environment, particularly for LGBTQ educators, impact both students and staff?
Yeah, I read that question beforehand and I thought, wow, this is a great question. So I want to first start off piggybacking on what Dr. Patty said related to policy. So policy plays a part in that. And schools and school districts, because of the way that education system works, local control is what happens in all school districts. And so from the policy level on down to how people behave really impacts everything. And when the policy says, when we have policies that say we are an inclusive environment, we offer folks, bereavement leave for anyone you consider your spouse or family member or things like that. We have all these things. So that sort of starts it off. And when we create that environment for teachers, what we have are teachers who are more able to be authentic. And I think when I was talking earlier about this authenticity piece, when teachers can be more authentic, there is research out there that shows that a higher level of authenticity leads to better self-efficacy. And when teachers have that self-efficacy, they are much better able to attend to all the needs of students. I think that's even really more paramount now than ever, given, what we're facing in schools with students who are struggling so much with mental health concerns. And I mean, it seems these days that the students, like school-age students, have much less of a problem with all the different genders that a lot of these middle school and high school students are identifying as. They're not the ones who have as much of a problem with each other as it is the grown-ups who have trouble dealing with, well, what are all these different genders? How does this work? Well, how can somebody use the bathroom if they were born this way and now they're this way? Forgetting about the fact that it's been happening for centuries, but we just never had a name for it. We never put a name to it. And so when we create that environment for teachers, it inevitably bleeds down into the student level. And you've got, authentic LGBTQ educators who are willing to openly be involved with a GSA, for example. In some of my survey research, one of the questions that I ask is, is there a GSA at your school, and do you feel comfortable being involved in it? Are you willing and able to be out in your community? And so when we create those environments for teachers, it only leads to better outcomes for students, more sense of belonging, and I think it almost is similar to, we've got so many schools who have very diverse populations of students, and yet across the country, we've got, anywhere in any district, 80 to 90% of your teachers are white. And so we've got this dynamic of, we've got lots of kids of color who in the future would be amazing teachers, and yet they don't see themselves in their teachers. And so then, of course, subconsciously, they're going to think, well, this isn't a career for me. And the same goes for LGBTQ kids. They think, well, with how teachers are attacked just in general in the public realm, and then if a teacher is gay, a lot of times in past, some of the historical literature talks about how LGBTQ folks were considered pedophiles if they were teachers, and that is very has been very distinct by region of the country, which is probably not a huge surprise to anyone. But again, when we create these environments that sustain teachers, the teachers who are the front line are then better able to sustain the students. And that's where it all matters, what we do for students and how we support them. LGBTQ youth have some of the highest rates of suicide ideation, of substance use disorders, and things like that. And so it's paramount for our future in this country that we are able to create an environment where everyone feels a sense of belonging.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's all about supporting the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Alex, I would like to tap into your wisdom. So you work in a field that is often seen as very technical, yet you've managed to integrate public policy into your research. How do you find your own authentic voice in the tech world to also advocate for policy change? And has it been challenging to reconcile these two different realms?
That's a really great question. And the short answer is yes. Very challenging. And the reason for that is that the technical shield is a defense, right? It's a defense mechanism that the powers that be use to justify their grossly unethical and amoral decisions. And so if you look at the history of the internet, it didn't just emerge. We weren't just born with like network cards attached to our bodies the way we are now. The reason it came to be is because the government of the United States made an enormous investment for a very long time to launch what was initially an academic and military network. At one point, then the US government decided, we're going to let the private sector rule over how the internet is structured. And so there's this kind of really big inflection point from the underlying technologies, the underlying networks that power the internet, to what happened to the web. And I think it's fair to say that most people don't like the way the web ended up being structured, that social media ended up being structured. Part of the reason for that is that technical arguments are often intentionally obscured. And they are obscured because tech companies want to avoid regulation. And there is a real gap in technical prowess between the people who are supposed to regulate the technologists and the technologists themselves. Like, that is very real. And it's concerning, and it's getting worse. However, the reason there is a gap is because there has been this fortification built around the technology, right? And so if you think of communication technologies at a basic level, they function in a very similar way, for example, to the postal service, right? You deliver your letter to a postal service, and then it has all these intermediaries, and then it gets to your destination. Like the same thing happens to your packets, right? Like your device sends them to your home router, who then sends them to the next router, and so on. And so this distinction between what's technology and what's policy is cultural, and it's intentional. And it's false. It's a false dichotomy. And one of the things that I've discovered with my research is that if you look for more than 30 seconds, you will see that the structure of the network at the country level, like really big infrastructure, right, like hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, have followed government policy. And then government policy responds to how companies behave. And operating at that intersection is challenging, in part because it's interdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary work is always challenging because you have to convince both disciplines that you're doing something new. But it's also challenging because it is there's resistance to engaging in discussion of technology and its social impact. And things are starting to change very slowly. Like the FTC is much more aggressive now, and I think the consequences of just letting the internet be this wild west, let a few white guys get incredibly rich and let everybody else be harmed. I think people have caught up with that. I think ordinary people have seen that the internet and technology companies don't have their best interests at heart, and that the government hasn't done enough to make things better for them. It's been a very fruitful intersection, and in reality, the reason there's so much resistance is because there is a lot of profit to be had from the separation, and dismantling that is kind of like what I want to do for the remainder of my career.
Right. Thank you, Alex. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to audience questions. So for people on Zoom, please put a question in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll ask you to come off mute to ask your question. I'll also be taking questions from the Whova app. So we already have one question in the Zoom. So it's a two-part question. The first question is, how can individuals attach their cause to a policy? And so I will direct this to Dr. Patty first.
Thank you. Great question. Definitely, this is important. I think, as I shared before, you can start right where you are with any topic, initiative that you are passionate about. And these types of causes work best in numbers. So I would start with thinking about what local level, state level, or national level association or organization can you partner with? Because there are amazing associations that are available to students, and many of them have student rates that you can join and be a part of. So I would take advantage of that. I would really start with Google. I would go on there and just Google your cause and attach it to a national or local organization. For example, public health is my background. So there's a public health where Rutgers is in New Jersey. There's a state level public health association. There's the American Public Health Association. APHA just had their amazing annual conference in Atlanta that just was last week. That's on a national level. Then there's a state level, and then there's some local levels. There might even be opportunities at your school if you are a doctoral student or a postdoctoral student. So I would start with partnerships where you can get involved, because once you are with others, that's when it starts to take movement. You can get signatures signed. You can develop white papers. You can write research. And this is what policymakers need. They need data about what's happening in their communities so that they can start the process. So it's important that you are in touch with the data of what's going on. So that might be putting on your research hat and looking up in terms of your school library or Google Scholar, paying attention to news headlines and being able to answer these questions, because unfortunately our policymakers, sometimes they may not have the time, they may not even have the level of I don't know how to say this well, but you might find yourself having to summarize some of the issues that's happening that you're passionate about. So you want to learn how to speak briefly with facts, evidence-based facts, and with anecdotes, meaning comments that people are experiencing this. And I would take this, find out who your local policy leaders are in your local community. Many people, they do not know what's going on in their community unless they go out and it's a presidential election. But I would start with just locally finding out who are the individuals that you need to know. And then I would definitely get involved on a local, state, and national level, and get involved with some committees, even be a part of one, and maybe after a year or so, lead one, and see the changes come about. And definitely, I'm excited about that. It's great to see the younger generation moving towards creating change.
Thank you, Dr. Patty. So we do not have that much time left. So with the time we do have, I want to ask each of you if you could maybe impart some words of wisdom in just like a couple minutes or so. And I'll start with you, Tiffany.
Words of wisdom. Oh boy. Makes me sound old. That's okay though. No, so I like what we're talking about here as far as all of the different intersections that we all have and the real emphasis on policy. As Dr. Patty was talking, I was really thinking about, I mean, my expertise is more at the public school level, so public school policy at the local, federal, and state levels. And there are opportunities for folks to get involved in that. But I also just think that, this authenticity piece, also being kind to yourselves, because sometimes you get put in a really difficult situation. And there are times where you might have to protect yourself, and just being okay with yourself, but still moving forward in strength. I think it's just, there are so many different environments that we all navigate every day. And there are some environments where we may not feel like it's safe to be our authentic selves for every single moment. So just remembering that at times, if you have to do something for protection, it's okay as long as you keep growing towards that authenticity, and also recognizing that what that authenticity looks like is going to change as you grow and continue to learn and age, and some of your identities change. I wasn't always a mother, but I've been for the past 14 years, and I'm a much better human for being a mother. And so just also recognizing that who your authentic self is will change and grow as you get older and more experienced and further on in your careers and your family journeys.
Thank you so much. And Alex?
Yeah, I also feel the weight, as Tiffany, of the word wisdom in the question. I will say a couple of thoughts that I have. The first is that you can't do this alone, despite what the media narrative will have you believe. There is no scientist in a basement doing this on their own. It's always an enormous team, and there's always so many people whose contributions are not even acknowledged. And so it's a lie, and it's a lie that benefits the prevailing narrative that white men are somehow superior, right? And so don't believe the lie. They didn't do it alone. Nobody did it alone ever in history. So seek out mentors who are either in your department or not in your university. Like, seek out somebody who you can be honest about what you're feeling and about the challenges you're facing, and who is making those challenges worse and how to navigate that. I got into quite a bit of trouble in my PhD because I just wouldn't accept, like some people would just underestimate me, and that just made my blood boil. And if I had a senior mentor who had been through this, I maybe would have handled that with more grace. And the second thing I will mention is that you really need to protect yourself. And that means protecting yourself from yourself, right? Like you will have times when your instinct is to work until you are pulp. And that helps nobody, and especially doesn't help your work. You will not do your best work 14 hours in a row. You'll do your best work for the first 3 hours, and then you'll do the equivalent of like 30 minutes for the rest of that time, and you will feel awful at the end of that. And so I will say, don't take the language of boundaries that's been overemphasized and underutilized, to borrow Dr. Patty's phrase, as a joke. I think they're very real, and they're discouraged in academia. They're strongly discouraged in academia. I know the language is, oh, boundaries, mental health, but the actual culture is very workaholic and kind of disappear into your work. And that's harmful to your work, and that's harmful to you. And trust me, like there is no research project that is worth more than you. So take that seriously.
Thank you, Alex. And Dr. Patty?
In a word, I would say balance. It's so important. The research that I am involved in now has to do with stress in the workplace. And I'm speaking about migraines, stomach aches, feeling tired all the time, lethargic. These are all symptoms that point to stress. And so one of the things that I share, some workshops that I actually do, it stems from one of my personal slogans, which is to treat your body like a temple and not a trash can. And so what does that mean? When we see temples, they're beautiful, they're made of gold, they are immaculate, they're always taken care of, there's someone there to take care of them. And so in the same way, we should take care of our bodies. We should pay attention to a headache. It may not be a headache. It might be the root cause of stress. So I would encourage you to incorporate meditation, take breaks away from work if you can, including schoolwork, practice deep breathing, and explore other mindful exercises and activities. And unfortunately, it might even be individuals that might be causing you some stress. So I would say to practice boundaries and to limit yourself around toxic people, even social media, to put up boundaries so that you can do the important work that you were made to do.
Thank you, Dr. Patty. And for our students that have any remaining follow-up questions, could they feel free to reach out to you three?
Absolutely. Anytime.
Awesome.
My email's on my website, so.
Okay, amazing.
And
Awesome.
I believe that they can find us in the Whova app, right? Our
Yes, exactly.
information, or on LinkedIn. Perfect.
Yeah.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And so with that, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you all feel enlightened and inspired after today's discussion. Please join us for our next set of concurrent sessions, Exploring My Horizons, My Expedition into Research and Beyond Academia, and Weaving a Web of Support, My Mentorship Journey Unveiled, happening from 3:20 p.m. to 4:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Desmond. Great job
Thank you.